Morning, everybody. Welcome to the latest edition of the Esri National Security Webinar Series. Today's topic is titled Leveraging ArcGIS for School Safety. My name is Carl Walter, and I'm the Industry Manager for Homeland Security here at Esri, and I will be facilitating our webinar today. For our agenda, we have 60 minutes scheduled for this webinar, and we should have time for a few questions at the end, and you can submit those questions through the webinar online tool. If we are not able to get to your question, we will respond to you directly through the email address you provided when you registered. And if you're interested in more specific information on how to deploy ArcGIS in supporting your school safety objectives, there'll be an option on the survey tool at the end of the webinar where you can specifically request to be contacted. Our webinar today is being recorded, and the link to that recording will be sent out to you in a follow-up email for whatever reason, if you couldn't stay online or if you want to share that recording with other colleagues, you are able to do so. And then our agenda is very simple. I'm going to introduce our team of presenters, and we'll then go right into our program. After our intros, we'll go through a 30-year review of school violence, what's happened at a national level, and we'll bring that down to a more state and local level. We'll go into creating daily operational plans on how to pre-plan and prepare for a active shooter scenario, for example, 3D situational awareness, and working with integrated 3D mesh data sets. We will also have a piece on imagery and explain why you may not be able to rely solely on imagery that you get online, Esri-based maps, something like that. And then we will get into a piece, what we're calling GIS in action, where we'll have some government presentations from the state of Alabama, where they will talk about their school safety plan and GIS apps that support that, as well as from the Illinois State Police and the Illinois Fusion Center. We'll also talk about their school safety plan and some of the apps that support those requirements in Illinois. And again, hopefully some time for questions. Joining me today on our list of presenters is John Miller. John is a solutions engineer here at Esri, focused on state government. Phil Melke will be supporting this presentation. Phil's our 3D web product manager. From our business partner, NearMap, we have Chuck Dostal, and Chuck is a geospatial engineer with NearMap. And then our government participants are Jared Bostic, and Jared is the Deputy GIO from the state of Alabama, assigned to the Fusion Center in Alabama. And our final presenter is Nick Gray, and Nick is from the Illinois State Police, serves as their disaster intelligence officer, and he is assigned to the Illinois Fusion Center. I'm now going to turn the presentation over to John Miller, and he's going to walk through a couple things. He's going to review a 30-year file of school violence, but he's going to explain that all through our light business intelligence tool insights. So John, over to you.
All right, thank you very much, Carl. I appreciate it. So for this example, the data that we're going to use for the 30-year review is this K-12 school shooting database that is curated by the Center for Homeland Defense and Security. This is a database that is regularly updated, and it's freely available, so anybody can go and grab the data, and they have quite a bit of information about it as well. So to grab the data, there's this data download tab on the website here, and they have it broken out as a Google Sheets document, and you could use this to go ahead and filter out any data that you don't want. If you know certain states you're not interested in, you can go ahead and do that here. Or you can just grab the whole thing. So in this case, I've already downloaded the whole thing, and I have that ready to go. Now, the tool that we're going to pull that into is a tool called Insights for ArcGIS. Now, Insights is a web-based data analytics and exploration tool that you can use to very rapidly pull in both spatial and non-spatial data to explore it and answer questions and find out things maybe you didn't already know. It's a web-based tool, and it can run both in the cloud on our SaaS environment, or it can run within a secure on-premises set of servers. So you've got a number of deployment options there. So your Insights projects are broken out into workbooks. So right now what we're seeing here is an empty workbook that I've started for this demonstration. And then within those workbooks, you can have a series of pages where you can pull in maps and charts and tables. So in this case, we'll go ahead and hit the Add Data button. There are a number of different ways we can pull in data. So you can pull in data from your organization that you already have published. You can also pull in publicly available data. So for example, we have what's called the Living Atlas that has data, and we can also pull in boundary and demographic information. In this case, I'm going to pull in a CSV file that I've downloaded, and go ahead and add that in, and that's visible pretty much right away as this table. And we can view it, look at all the attributes, make sure everything pulled in clearly. One thing you'll see right away is that there's not a latitude and longitude field in this data. The only location data that's here is the city, the state, and the name of the school. For most geocoders, that is not enough to get you going. But for us, we can geocode against the school name. So I'll go ahead and pull up the menu for this layer, and I'll say I want to enable location. In this case, the location type I'm going to work with is address, and I can use the place name as the address. So in this case, I'll go with school, and then it automatically pulled out city and state. So then I would hit run, it'll run for a little while, and I've already got it prepped and loaded here. So this is that data that it's loaded in. This is the 30-year school shooting database, and I can go ahead and begin to visualize this in a number of different ways just in the map view. So by default, it'll just pull in points where each point represents an event, but I can change this on the fly if I want to. So in this case, I can say instead of styling just by the point, I want to style by the number of injured and fatalities. So I can switch to that, and it will give me these graduated circles. I could also restyle this with a heat map, for example, and that's a pretty useful data type, and then that will readjust on the fly as you pan and zoom. Another way to stylize data that's very useful for very dense data sets is with bins. So it'll break all of the data out into individual squares, so you can very quickly see where you've got hotspots. So here's an example of a type of chart we can pull in. So what I'm going to do is just grab the field. In this case, I'm just going to grab the date field, drag it over into the working area, and say I want to look at a time series diagram. And it's going to take a moment here. Looks like that's getting hung up a little bit.
Yeah, it looks like you're locked up, John. Let's go ahead and restart. We're going to move it on to Phil, and when Phil's done, we'll come back to that and finish that. Sure. So the idea was where we wanted to inform decision making on how to create operational plans, and what we were showing you there, and we'll show you, I guess, more in just a little bit after John reboots, is the ability to use data to drive your decision making to help you create your plans. And we're going to do this in a couple different ways with a couple different web applications, as well as some 2D and 3D examples. And Phil, I will turn it over to you to walk us through that process.
Okay, great. So I wanted to show this audience here a couple of different solutions, and just to take a step back and explain the way some of our solutions work here. It's a template style that helps you to get started with an immediate injection of applications into your ArcGIS Online or ArcGIS Enterprise organization, so that with this tactical operations planner, you can simply implement this ArcGIS Solutions deployment tool, click a button, and you'll have it right there within your organization. And I'll show you one of the other ones that we're going to be using for this is the visibility assessment tool. And so this is a useful way in which to really combine the two. Tactical planning is something that typically happens in a two-dimensional environment, but there's context and information that can be gained in 3D that is useful for the planning of evacuation routes, understanding the interior layouts of some of your schools, and then ultimately being able to provide a method of being able to escape with the least amount of visibility from the school itself. Helps you to really work through what some of your overall evacuation plans are. So let me show you first that tactical tactical tool here, the Tactical Operation Planner. And this is a configuration of Web App Builder that is designed to enable the development and the planning of routes, location checks, your overall tactical environment, and this can be used for barricaded entry. It's frequently used by law enforcement, but in this case, it's also useful in an active shooter situation in order to be able to define evacuation routes, where some of the sharing the locations of where some of the doors are, where the threat is occurring. And in this case, what we're looking at is Esri's campus. It's very similar to, say, a community college scenarios, or some of our larger high schools. And it's a very, there's a lot of trees on campus that kind of play into our visibility scenario here, and we've got a very simple plan that's associated with staging and getting help where we would ultimately stage some officers in the case of, say, a barricaded shooter, and where are some of our existing alternate entry points, where some of the staff that would be involved with securing the perimeter, and ultimately where we can go in order to find some medical care or to be able to run an evacuation here to our overall command post. So all of these, this is a very simple tool to use where you can really easily set up and share the locations of say where you're going to be putting some of your assets. In this case, this is a negotiator that we're placing right here. And the really great thing about WebGIS here is that once you set this in action, this is a web map that is then shared with everybody that can see it in your organization. It's shared to dispatch. It's a live, real-time view of what your operational plans are as the event is occurring. And the really interesting component to this too is anything that you plan in 2D can ultimately be reflected in 3D. So here we're looking at Esri's campus. And this is, we've got buildings in 3D. We've got all of our trees displayed in a thematic view. And there's a couple of things about the scene viewer that are both new. This is that we've released last week, and that you can start to take advantage of immediately. The first one is that we've reduced and removed the limitations for our polygons, lines, and points, so that a lot of our audience that's just started to get into WebGIS, you can add all of your 2D and 3D features here without any limitations. Using WebGL, we have a really great response rate for this, and we can ultimately be able to share plans in 3D either with the public or just internally. One of the other tools that I want to show you here that is pretty amazing is our slice tool. And what this will do is really slice through some of our layers here. And it's a really useful way to be able to understand your floor plans and your layouts and really break open a building so that you can plan accordingly. And this is, it's useful in a lot of different industries and applications, but in the case of school safety here, it's one of those where you can start to begin to plan your built environments in 3D so that you can ultimately be able to get that information when you need it. So just kind of taking a little tour of our campus, we're able to use these slides in order to be able to examine some of our bookmarks. And here we're going to see our tactical plan just brought right into our 3D built environment here. And so I can access that slice tool still in order to be able to break through and understand what we're looking at all different levels. And in this case, this is the same build out that we developed there using that tactical planner tool. So now what I want to switch to is to show you about our assess visibility solution and how that's useful in this environment. Ultimately, the assess visibility is a pro package with a series of tasks that is ultimately sets up a geoprocessing routine to take this is our building. This is the potential where our active shooter is. And then we've got an area that we're trying to plan an evacuation route and ultimately understand the safest way to be able to get people out of the building and out of harm's way. And visibility definitely comes into play for that. So what this solution does is it places a grid over the building, places a grid on the ground for where where we're ultimately trying to stage our evacuations through, and then it draws a line from each one of these grids all to the ground here, to the point where ultimately this is 150,000 lines that are drawn and quantified in order to give us a understanding of what the visibility is. And what I mean by that is, you can be at any one window and see a certain amount of campus given the trees or some of the buildings here. But what if we're not really sure exactly where they are? They could be at any one of these windows. What is the percentage that they're able to visualize or they're able to see, based off of all of these potential obstacles in the way with these trees and also this building? So we're looking at the results of that analysis product that was developed in Pro and published to ArcGIS Online. And here we're seeing the darker the area, the less visibility from this building. And we're also seeing a closer look here of what is the potential risk while looking at this building. How much can be seen from this building? The darker the color here, that means that there's actually more of this target area that could be seen, this where we're going to be ushering some of our evacuees through, and that can as these outcrops here of the building have a bit more visibility of some of this area, it helps to give you really a scientific view of where you should ultimately plan your evacuations, and to understand the amount of visibility that somebody inside that building has. And that is really useful from a distance to ultimately be able to plan what that evacuation route is. So here is our pre-planned evacuation route that we set around in 2D. It seemed to make sense for us, but using this visibility assessment tool, I think we can ultimately recognize that we can make some adjustments to this evacuation plan to ultimately be able to get people quicker from this exit out of harm's way into areas that are darker, that have less visibility. And so that, using this visibility assessment tool can ultimately help you to plan evacuations like this just the same way as it can be used in order to understand and to plan for your overall site security. Now, the beauty of WebGIS here is that you can share this in multiple views to a variety of different stakeholders here. So one was the school view. This is that same picture, just a little different with some additional layers in dispatch. And so CAD systems can take advantage of our WebGIS and what we can see in 3D here. And here we can see actually live tracked units here using our GeoEvent extension that can server role that can ultimately provide you with a real-time picture of where all of your units are based off of AVL. And so from here, this is ultimately about the ability to capture reality, understand where your trees are in order to be able to assess visibility. And these are thematic. This is a start. This is caused, these are trees that are gained from our facilities group, but ultimately we want to be able to get a better picture of this. And a way to do that is by using what's called an integrated mesh. This is something that's gathered from our drone to map program. This is one flight of a drone over our campus buildings. And you can see it's a bit more realistic. And that's not just for the sake of visibility, but ultimately to be able to understand some of the obstacles that are in the way for visibility to better plan accordingly. So 3D, it's there's a lot of recent advancements that it's a good time to start considering it in the case of crime analysis, in the cases of site security especially, and ultimately to help you to plan for more safe schools. So with that, I think we're going to take it back to John because he's got a chance to be able to show us the rest of that Insights program.
Great, thank you, Phil. And as John is loading up again, Phil actually showed quite a bit there. The operational pre-planning. We went through a mission or a use case where there was an actual active shooter, and then on the fly, he adjusted that plan to account for the analytics of his 3D analysis, where a danger zone had been identified based on the threat and then based on the evacuation plan, and he changed that on the fly and was able to share that out. So now we're going to go back to John Miller, and he's going to finish his review of that 30-year school violence data set.
All right, thank you, Carl. So I've gone ahead and pulled in a couple of additional cards here that I think are pretty useful. One right here immediately to the right of the map view is a simple histogram of the reliability of this data. So this is a metric that they provide in the data set for each incident, where 1 is an anecdotal report and 5 is court records that are very well backed up and distributed. So we can see most of these incidents just take place in the handful of news reports range, which is something that people may want to be aware of. We can automatically filter off this data by clicking on each one of these columns, and whenever we click on it, it'll filter both the map as well as these charts. Give them a moment to draw here. So this one shows a count of all of the events over the years, which is useful, but we can make it a little bit more granular by also adding the months to this. So you'll see in the summer months, there aren't very many events, which is what you would expect. Another type of way that we can visualize this data is with a number of different charts, such as tree charts. So if I want to look at categories of events, I can pull this over, go ahead and drop it into the chart, change the visualization type to tree map, and right away these will all be drawn out. If we wanted to draw it instead as a donut chart, we could change it on the fly. So it's very quick and easy to change. We can also click on events and it will redraw all the other components automatically. They're all dynamically linked together. We can also pull in multiple different charts or multiple different types of data and visualize them together in one chart. For example, I can look at, not summary, school type. So if I want to look at the category of the type of event as well as the school type together, I can draw those together in a chord diagram, for example. And what that will do is it'll show me the relationship of the type of event with the type of school. So we see most of these are high schools and most of these are escalations of disputes, but we could filter it out accordingly to remove data that we didn't want to see. Let's see, we can also perform global filters. So for example, one thing that Carl had mentioned earlier was the ability to look at data in a little bit more of a precise fashion. So in this case, I can filter down to just an individual state. In this case, I'll pick Tennessee here. And then when I apply that filter, it will carry out to all of the additional cards as well. And then let's see, so say I wanted to look at this data in relation to county population. I can very easily go in to our Living Atlas and pull out our county data set. Go ahead and add that in here. And then I'll want to filter this as well to only give me the Tennessee counties. And then what I can do is I can summarize this point data from the school shooting database and do a spatial aggregation. And so I can pull this in, and then I can also add some additional statistics. So let's say I wanted to see the average of injuries and fatalities. If I wanted to see what the average reliability score is, and then let's say on average the age of the shooter. So we can then run this aggregation, and when it completes, it'll show us the counties where events took place, as well as how many. So we can see down here where Memphis is and Nashville. That's what we would have expected. And then we can also visualize this by population as well. And get pretty quick looks. Now you can pull in your own data to this, of course, as well. Any types of points, lines, or polygons, as well as other types of demographic data out of the Living Atlas, or infrastructure data from data sets such as the Highfield data set. So Carl, back to you.
All right, thanks, John. So great example, again, an open source data set that you're able to bring in and help you inform your decision making on understanding the school threats over a long period of time, and then being able to bring it down to a state and local area to understand something more specific to your needs. Our next presenter is Chuck Dostal from NearMap, and I've asked Chuck to talk a little bit about NearMap and some of its offerings. But again, the big thing here is to provide an understanding of sometimes there's a need for real-time or near real-time imagery, and it is much simpler and much cheaper than it's ever been, and it's only getting easier and cheaper to bring in. So Chuck, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Carl, and thank you everybody else. Thank you for joining. This is really going to piggyback off of a lot of what Phil demonstrated in ArcGIS Pro and in ArcGIS Online. So what we're presenting here, it's myself, I'm a geospatial engineer with NearMap. I've also got my colleague, John L. Schultz, who's our Senior Director of International Partnerships and Expansion. We're going to give you just a brief overview of what NearMap is and kind of what we do in the industry. So we've been around for 10 years. We're Australian based. We've been collecting in the US since 2014. We mainly cover urban areas. We cover 72% of the US population. We've got tons of users, 72,000. We sell to multiple industries. And the reason that we've grown so much is because we capture imagery that's very, very current. So we focus on updating imagery very often. And we don't limit our customers on what they can view. They get access to our entire database. So some of the hallmarks of our company are what we call our 5 C's: currency, clarity, change, cloud-based, and consistency. So the currency of our imagery, none of our imagery is going to be more than a year old. Some areas we collect 3 times a year, some 2 times a year, and the smaller metros we cover at least once per year. All that imagery is at 2.8-inch resolution. And what we create from that is all kinds of different content. So we'll get into that in a little bit later. But what you get is a real view of the ground, what's actually on the ground, not an outdated view from 4 or 5 years ago. And it allows you to see change over time, and change pretty rapidly over a few years. All this is cloud-based, so it's available via our APIs. We have a standalone map browser that people can use to view the imagery. We basically integrate into any platform out there that has the capability of viewing imagery. And all this is consistent. We're not changing our resolution or any of the ways that we capture. So this just kind of shows our coverage map and where we cover. You'll see that all of the yellow and orange areas are where we have 3D content. It's where we have our oblique content. All of the blue areas are typically cities of about 60,000 and above. And those are where we capture just once per year. So we're constantly flying all over the country with multiple aircraft, multiple camera systems, trying to keep our imagery fresh and up to date for our users. And we've been talking a lot about 3D, and 3D is NearMap's new big thing. So we've got a lot of 3D out there. We've got point clouds, we've got 3D mesh, we've got digital surface models, and this is where it's all available. So we cover a lot of ground with our 3D. We can capture about 2,500 square kilometers in a single 4-hour flight with our camera system, which is patented. We've also got a patented processing system. which is one of the hallmarks of our company, because we can capture imagery, get it processed, and have it out in just a matter of a few days. So you have access to that immediately from your desktop. So you can use it inside of all the applications that Philip was showing earlier. So this is just some of the products. So vertical imagery, obviously, we've got oblique imagery. We've got something that we call panorama imagery, which is a stitched mosaic of all of our obliques. So you can seamlessly pan and zoom around your environment from a 45-degree angle. We're also getting into artificial intelligence and machine learning, being able to see change detection and identify features automatically. We've also got our 3D products, like we said, 3D mesh, DSM, those are all available as well. So now we'll get into some of the content here. This is just a neighborhood over 3.5 years' time. A lot of the imagery that people use might be 4 years old. You kind of see what happens in that 4 years, what you're missing. If you're responding to a situation and you don't even know where the roads are at because they're not on your aerial imagery, it could really change your tactical plan. This is just a really quick view of what our imagery really looks like. So this is inside of our standard web mapping application that all of our customers have access to, and I apologize if there's any lag. We're basically just panning around in a what we call our panorama, and right now we'll show some transformers here, and what you're going to see in those transformers is that they're not visible from a standard 45-degree angle. You can't see them, but our camera system collects from multiple angles. So anywhere from 0 to 45 degrees, we've got images of that. And what happens when you change angles, you actually have the ability to go in and select from a different image. So that's the standard image, and then you can change it to a different image. So you really unlock what's on the ground. There's not a lot of obstacles that you can't see. Because you have all those different view angles, you're able to go in and measure objects. So you can measure doorways, you could identify windows, you can do a lot of different things with this. So all that content is unlocked with our different view angles. So this goes on to some of the stuff that Philip was talking about, our next slide here, which is, again, this might be a little bit laggy, but very important to show. So this is a 3D mesh model, which you can also put into a scene viewer on ArcGIS Online. And what you're going to see is kind of a situation where we have somebody in a building and we want to see what that person can see. So using these built-in tools from Esri, we can really, really quickly, in under a minute, determine what is visible from that building. So we'll just do a quick view shed analysis here. And then we're going to just set up our parameters of what the field of view is going to be. This person's in a corner window, so you might have a very wide angle of view. So we'll set it to 270 degrees on the horizontal. And what you'll see is you really get a quick picture of all the 3D objects that are visible from that building. So you could also do this in the reverse order. You could look at this building from other buildings and determine, where are the blind spots? Where should we stage our people? Where should we place people so we have overlapping fields of view? This could all be sent out immediately to the people on the ground. You could do this via a scene in ArcGIS Online, or you could even just do screenshots and send them out to the people that are on the ground to say, hey, this is the building that you don't want to be by. So really, really powerful tools that you can use extremely quickly. Now we'll go on to the next slide here. So this is just kind of a similar slide that is showing what our mesh really looks like and what its capabilities are. And one of the first things that we're going to look at is an aqueduct that they're working on in Seattle. And you'll notice that you can see all the way down into the hole, which is really impressive. Because of the way that we collect, we have images from multiple angles, about 30 images of every point on the ground. So we can really recreate the environment in a very, very natural way. It's the truth on the ground. So you're actually seeing what is there. All this can be done using measurements that are accurate to within 12 inches. So be able to do line of sight measurements, view dome, height, volume, all kinds of different measurements to be able to, plan and create your environment and kind of be ready for anything that comes. So with that, that is our last slide. And just wanted to say that, this 3D imagery is available all over the country and can be used, just as Philip was showing, to kind of plan your environment, plan for situations, and see that real truth on the ground. And that's all I have. So thank you.
Great examples, Chuck. Thank you. And I think that really displays where the industry has gone, and certainly in the last 10 years, but even more so in the last couple of years, and the speed and the ease of where you can get much smaller products rather than having to rely on maybe a whole city flyover and whatnot. One of the things that we always like to do on these webinars is bring in examples from industry. And I mentioned that we've got Alabama and Illinois both online with us today. I'm going to turn it now over to Jared Bostic. And again, Jared works out of the State Fusion Center in Alabama, where he is the Deputy GIO. And Jared, over to you.
Thanks, Carl. So I have 4 items that I'd like to cover today. The first being who the Alabama Fusion Center is. Secondly, the governor here at the state of Alabama has created something called the Safe Council. I'll explain a little bit about that. Third, I'd like to demonstrate here the dashboard that you guys are seeing in front of you and what that information is representing. And then lastly, I'd like to highlight or talk about what our next steps are for where we're going with this information. So some of you might not be aware of what fusion centers really are, but to give you an idea, here in Alabama, we are located within the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, specifically within our State Bureau of Investigation. And we are one of 79 fusion centers across the United States with a focus on all crimes, all threats, and really all hazards, made up of, and our fusion center is made up of intelligence analysts, investigative technicians. We have representatives from DHS, Intel and Analysis. The FBI is located here as well, or a representative from the FBI is located within the Fusion Center. Then we also have a representative from the National Guard's counter-drug program. And then lastly, we have someone from our local law enforcement agency with the Montgomery Police Department. But just a real high overview of what Fusion Centers were kind of designed to do, and that was really for information sharing among the organizations, designed to fuse that information between federal agencies, state and local government, the private sector, and then finally with the intelligence community. So that gives you an idea of what fusion centers really are. Secondly, here, why are you guys seeing this dashboard? So obviously, school safety is a very hot topic right now. And what we have done within the state is our governor has created the Safe Council, which stands for Securing Alabama's Facilities of Education. That council is made up of a series of council members, one from the state superintendent of education, the Alabama Community College system, our secretary of the Alabama Law Enforcement Agency, the Alabama Department of Mental Health, and then finally the Secretary of Information Technology. And what this council really did was they came together and they came up with several recommendations, but there are really 2 that I'd like to highlight for you guys as why you're seeing this. So the first was being physical security. So they identified 3 areas for physical security, and those were funding for SROs, or school resource officers, and district safety coordinators. They really want to provide and dedicated and sustained funding for those SROs and district safety coordinators, so we can reach as many schools as possible with that funding. The second was creating a bond issue for enhancing school building security. So we'll have some funding available for that. And then finally, within that physical security was surveillance systems linked to our law enforcement, so we can have those camera feeds potentially within this system, within this dashboard environment as well. And then the second recommendation that I'd like to highlight is the threat assessments and mental health. So for school-based mental health, we really were looking at expanding the school-based mental health collaboration for hiring as many master's level mental health professionals as possible. We also want to identify warning signs. So we're looking at creating an evidence-based threat assessment model with tiered intervention options for identifying troubled students, and their troubled behavior. We're also looking at reporting threats. So the reporting threats and tracking school violence is really why this dashboard was intended, because from the reporting threats perspective, we wanted to create this virtual platform for reporting threats, make it possibly available to students, their parents, teachers, members of the community, the potential for district safety coordinators to consult with school personnel, determine whether the reported threats require a response from any type of school personnel, law enforcement, or potentially both. And then the tracking component, which is what all this symbology that you're seeing here, we're requiring schools, to report incidents or events that have taken place from school violence. They currently have to report that to the State Department of Education. And currently, the only way that they're really doing that is through an annual incident report that's due each year. So at the end of each year, the schools are required to send in a report of everything that took place within that school year. And so the last thing, I want to talk about and follow up on that is what we're doing with this data. But let me kind of walk you through this dashboard and give you an idea of what we're looking at. So each symbol here is representing the different type of threat or event that has taken place within the school. So as you can see, we're tracking bomb threats, any type of general threat, shooting threat. You guys see how it's all symbolized. And what we're showing here is that we're not just tracking what's taking place within Alabama. We're also tracking what's happening nationally. And the first thing I'd like to just throw out there is that this is not proprietary data. This is all open source information that we're getting from an intelligence community, and then also reports that are coming in to our analyst here within the Fusion Center. And so what you see here is that since August 1st, we have identified 49 incidents within the state. And then the number of national incidents that you see here is representing 142. That 142 is the number of incidents within this map view. But if you want to see very quickly the number of national incidents that have taken place, I've set a tolerance to just show up and show every incident that we've identified since August 1st as 766 events nationwide. So within this map, we're not just showing incidents. We also have all these different data layers where we have the locations of all of our public schools, our colleges and universities, private schools, and then we also have a data set that I highlight here and help understand one of the processes that we're tracking with this dashboard, and that is something called NC4. And what that NC4 NC4 is a open source intelligence tool that filters through information across a web, and it presents that to you through this data set that we have pulled in. So what you're seeing here, it's all real-time information. What we have noticed is that a lot of times there's been incidents within Alabama, and we'll be sitting here watching this dashboard, and an incident will pop up, and we get that notification before any type of law enforcement notifies us of something going on. So let me just show you what that NC4 potentially looks like. So obviously up here towards Memphis, we see that there is an officer, reports of an officer-involved shooting, potentially one person injured. And so why is that important to us? Well, the information that we're collecting is represented over here on this left side docked window. And those are all the threats that have taken place. Well, how are we collecting that, and how's it showing up in this dashboard? So we're leveraging the Survey 123 application, and all this information is being inputted by our analyst here within the information, within that center. And so all this information is collected. It is then represented in real time and shows up on this dashboard. So if I just choose Sparkman 9th grade school shooting threat, it instantly zooms to that school, and the information that we were collecting within that survey is now represented in this pop-up window, and we can see the analyst that input the information, some information about what was given, the type of threat. We also capture if there is a news outlet, we capture that URL, and we all know that after time, URLs potentially go away. So what we're doing is we're also capturing just a snippet of that URL and the information, so we always have that historical record. And what you guys see here is we have a 1 mile buffer zone. So this black line is representing a 1 mile buffer zone, and that's where the NC4 data comes in. So if an incident takes place, NC4 populates within 1 mile of a school. We then get notification to let us know that instantly something is happening. Could be an accident within 1 mile of the school, or it could be something pertaining to that school. We just know something has happened within that location, and we can notify the proper authorities if needed. All right, so additionally, we're doing the same thing for the national incidents, and then also the NC4 incidents. All that information is populating in real time. The last incident that takes place is showing up on top. So lastly, what are we doing with this data? So here within the Fusion Center, you have the ability to export all of that information that we've collected, maybe to an Excel table. And what we're doing with that Excel table is we're then populating that information within Insights, the program John Miller was demonstrating for you earlier. We can look at that data. We can potentially look at the trends of that data. We can say, all right, maybe certain days of the week, threats are happening more often. We can look at the types of threats, and so on and so forth. So we'll have a complete snapshot overview of every threat that took place and be able to report that to the governor's office at the end of the year. And then finally, what's next for this dashboard? So we're currently engaged with the State Department of Education. We're looking at integrating the weather closings or delays from the schools, and all that information is coming from that authoritative source, the State Department of Education. We also have all of our K through 12 floor plans entirely mapped. We have the ability to do the 3D rendering, the walkthrough of several of our schools. We have access to a lot of the school cameras. So we're looking at potentially integrating that into the system as well. And this is all locked down. It's all a role-based system. So we can only give access to the individuals that need be. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you, Jared. That's a great example, comprehensive and creative of of how the GIS platform can be used as a way to manage all this information. And if you know, to kind of summarize some of the things that Jared did, I mean, there's a collection piece through Survey 123 where real-time and near real-time information can be brought in from the field and assessed in the command center. There was a analytical component where they were filtering and focusing not on all the information, but on the information within a buffered area, so the information that really mattered, and then the ability to share and distribute that information because these are all web-based applications. So through vetted personnel pre-selected by the Alabama law enforcement folks, they can share that information so everybody has the same operational picture. And then maybe even the most interesting part, Jared, I thought, was you can no longer rely just on information for your city and for your state. What happens around you and what happens even nationally or internationally now matters in the security environment that we're in. And that was a great example of government sources of information coming in, as well as private sector global resources with the NC4 threat feed. So thank you, Jared. We're going to now turn this over to Nick Gray, and Nick has a similar position to Jared in the state of Illinois, and Nick sits in the Fusion Center there also, where he is their disaster intelligence officer. And I'm going to turn this now over to Nick so you can tell us your story in Illinois, Nick.
All right, thanks, Carl, and thanks, Jared, for your presentation. I think it's important to note that the network of fusion centers, how they kind of work together and bounce ideas off each other. So you probably see some similarities in some of the things that I'm showing that you saw from Alabama, but again, just trying to kind of replicate some best practices across the fusion center as a whole. So once again, name's Nick Gray. I work at the Illinois Statewide Terrorism Intelligence Center, which is one of the 2 fusion centers in Illinois. We fall under the Illinois State Police, where the other fusion center in the state, the Crime Prevention Information Center, falls under the Chicago Police Department. So here at the STIC, we are fortunate enough to have a school intelligence officer who works full-time in analyzing these types of data and sharing information with the school resource officers and law enforcement regarding school threats and other issues. And although she's not necessarily a GIS analyst or had much prior experience with GIS, she was quickly kind of realized the value of using GIS to help with school safety. So one of the first big projects that we worked on was developing a school floor plan application. So the Illinois State Police sent out their safety education officers. So one trooper per district they sent out, who is responsible for going out and actually collecting the floor plans for all the schools in their area. So after this process was complete, we're able to either add the digital documents that they gave us or scan the actual floor plans and add them as attachments to the feature class for the schools. So this was really the only heavy lift of this project. And since the floor plans were really only need to be updated if there's construction or updates to the school, our school intelligence officer is in communication with the schools, and we are able to update the floor plans as necessary. So the application itself is shown here is actually quite simple, and it's meant to be just kind of a simple and readily available application that can be pulled up quickly on a desktop or even a mobile device in case of a major incident at a school. So in the event of an incident at a school, a SWAT operator or any law enforcement responding on the way to the school can search for the school in the search bar and zoom to the specific school, look at the aerial imagery around the school, and also pull up the school floor plans, which are attached as PDFs. So I'll kind of show that here, how we made it so within the search bar itself, you could search for the school. So for example, if I was responding here to Metamora Grade School, I could pull this up, pull in the satellite imagery around that area. Again, whatever imagery that you have for the area, we could add, and then looking at the actual school floor plans. So again, it's a really simple app, but it's helpful because it is so simple. So any of our law enforcement officers who would be responding to an incident could pull this up, again, mobile device, any sort of device, and really just see the school floor plans and use that in their planning for that. So the other main GIS project we've been working on for school safety in Illinois is our school incident dashboard. It's very similar to what Alabama showed. So when schools or law enforcement report incidents into our Fusion Center, our school intelligence officer enters them into a GeoForm, which is showing here. So she also watches the open source reporting to collect school incidents that occur throughout the state. So why it's helpful is because you have that combination. You've got multiple data sources that are being entered into our database. So you have the open source side of things, but you also have the actual law enforcement data, the law enforcement information that's being called in by our partners to the Fusion Centers and being input. So the kind of the grouping of all that data really gives us a comprehensive picture of issues across the state. So within the fields in the GeoForm, as you can kind of see, we try to collect as much data as possible because that allows for the better analysis of data, whether you're using it in insights like shown before. The more data you collect on the incident, the more you're going to be able to do with it. Kind of one of the main things is just the categories of the incidents. So you can kind of see here, collecting on everything from bomb threats to natural disasters or hazmat situations, sexual assaults, suicide, thwarted school attacks, all sorts of categories that are being collected here. And also how it was received. So was the threat received over Snapchat or by a phone call, or was it written on a bathroom stall, that sort of thing. And then after our school intelligence officer enters this information, whether it came in from law enforcement or open source, that information shows up on our school incident dashboard. So this is what it looks like. And not only do we have access to this at the Fusion Center, but Illinois State Police Command has access to this. So they're able to view incidents as they're reporting and look at the data associated with that. And they're also able to query the data. So if they only want to look at what cyber attacks are happening, they're able to query that and see specifically the specific cyber attack incidents that have occurred relating to schools in the state. And we're constantly updating this. So recently we've added several other categories. So for example, adding the option to report on cyber attacks and attempted cyber intrusions. As the threats involved, it's really easy to edit the types of categories that can be added. And it's also just the dashboard's a great tool to take to schools and to show them the amount of incidents across the state, and just try to convince them of the importance of working closely with law enforcement, because the data that they do report to law enforcement that gets reported to us is being used to analyze what's going on in the state. So kind of looking forward as we continue to work with GIS to help enhance school safety in the state, we've got a couple other goals. One of the main goals is really just, this is similar to what Alabama said, just working with local law enforcement to help get them access to the dashboard here and to be able to report on their end themselves of what's happening. So we're currently working with some IT staff and a test agency to try to accomplish this and see what it would look like if the actual local law enforcement or school administrators actually had access to view this themselves. So that's basically the quick overview of how Illinois is using GIS to help with the school safety in the state. And now I'll go ahead and turn it back to you, Carl.
Thanks, Nick. Again, great examples. And I think some of the things that Nick show really display and articulate that GIS has gone from the guy in the back closet to GIS for everyone. And his examples kind of prove that, in that you have Illinois state troopers actually inputting some of this information, and then that's being shared, again, web applications in real time to a command and control scenario in their Fusion Center. And a lot's happened there. Just things are much easier than they used to be. And that's a great example that Illinois shown in proving that. We have time for maybe one or two questions, and this is probably for Chuck at NearMap. Chuck, there's a handful of questions here. I'm going to kind of summarize them, but essentially, if you can understand, or if you can help the participants understand pricing involved in some of the different deliveries that you guys can do. If it can be at, if you just want information for a specific school or a section of a county or a city, or all the way down to the state level, can you just help us understand how that pricing works?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Carl. We start off our pricing for our 3D mesh at $250 a square mile. So it's very affordable. We can deliver that in areas as small as 5 square miles. So you can get 5 square mile chunks, and our minimum purchase order is 25 square miles. So if you think of a school district or a local law enforcement agency, they could get chunks over the campuses of each of the schools that they need in their area. So again, $250 a square mile. So very affordable stuff.
Great, thanks, Chuck. And then we probably have time for one more question. We're at the top of the hour, and this is probably best for Phil Melke. Phil, there are several examples discussed on school floor plans. Can you show how somebody might include their school floor plans into GIS?
Sure thing. And showing the right screen?
Yes.
All right, so one of the things you'll remember from the presentation earlier is the ability to do, this kind of slice tool, or to view multiple levels within a school. And what we're looking at is a floor plan that can be the basis of what comes from basically construction plans, building information model. So we've recently enabled with our partnership with Autodesk to really consume that data from Autodesk, a drafting program that's used for construction, to ultimately be able to consume that information as a data source within ArcGIS and ArcGIS Online, so that using programs that had initially been used to design the school, drafting programs, the program and the data that you're looking for will be Revit. And Revit's an Autodesk format that is ultimately used for drafting and design that can now just be read directly into ArcGIS Online, so that you could reflect those floor plans without having to do a lot of the work of actually, reality capturing this. On the other end here too, that this is also something that can be digitized from floor plans. If all you have is paper, then by all means, it's worth the time to record that in GIS, so that you can be able to get an operational view of the inside of the buildings in order to be able to support school safety.
Great, thank you, Phil. And I'm going to be conscious of our time here. We're 2 minutes over. Just to remind everybody that this was recorded. We will answer the remaining questions through email, and we will provide all participants with a link to this video so you can watch it on your own free time. And with that, we're going to close out, and thank you for your time today. And we will, the next round of national security presentations will begin in January, and we hopefully will see you then. Thanks.